Now, storytelling is a powerful tool for connection and for preserving the memories of our loved ones. That is particularly true for two-time National Book Award winner Jesmyn Ward, who has found solace in storytelling after her grandmother passed away from Alzheimer's. She joins Walter Isaacson to discuss her latest collection of essays and how her writing has helped restore her hope after despair.
Jesmyn Ward, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here.
The first chapter of your book ends with the 6 magic words, I think, of any writer, which is, let me tell you a story. And that's the theme of the book, is the power of storytelling. Tell me why you find storytelling so important.
Well, I think back to, to when I was growing up. I come from a really big family in rural Mississippi, a really huge extended family. And when we gathered, we, celebrated and ate and drank, but also the older people in my family told stories. And so I grew up around storytellers. I grew up hearing stories of my grandparents, my great-grandparents. So I don't know. I feel like storytelling has always been really important to how I understand myself and to how I understand my community and my family and the people around me.
Well, let me focus on the great storyteller in your book, which is your grandmother. And she told stories that had a moral purpose to them as well. Just tell me about her. Tell me about sitting on her lap.
Yeah, so when I speak about my grandmother, I'm speaking about my maternal grandmother, my mom's mom. And I grew up with her. I mean, she was a second, well, not really a second, I guess a third parental figure for me. I grew up in her household because me and my nuclear family had to live with her for a number of years. When she told stories, she was always, it was always important to her that she was telling the whole story, right? Telling the good with the bad. She was, and her stories, there was a serious weight at the center of them, but at the same time that there was a serious weight at the center of them, her stories were also funny. They were also full of love and joy and connection. She did not have an easy life. She did not complete high school. She never graduated. She earned her GED. She worked really hard throughout her life, as a housekeeper and later as a factory worker. But she embraced life.
Let me quote her from the way you quote her in this book of essays, which is, you say, my Dorothy was the first storyteller of my life. One of the most important lessons she taught me about life and story was this: tell it straight, tell it all. And that what this book of essays has, and your fiction, your novels have it, which is you don't sort of sugarcoat things, and yet there's a core of hope and optimism that comes through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there are 2 reasons for that. The first reason is because writing, in that way is I'm being honest, right, about what I see in my family, in my extended family, and in my community, right? And then the second reason, that it's important to me to be honest in my work in that way is because I feel like, the people who came before me, my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, all the people who, who lived in this place and who made me what I am today, they lived their lives that way, right? They embraced the truth of their lives. And at the same time, they never lost a sense of hope. They held that close to them. And I think that's what made it possible for them to thrive and not just survive their lives.
Yeah, and you talk about survive. And once again, the last sentence of your book repeats the theme. You say you tell stories, you tell their stories, you tell your story, you survive. And so how important is it to the survival that we become a species of storytellers?
I mean, I think it's essential because storytelling enables us, I think, to connect the dots in our lives, to carry a sense of meaning in our lives. We also use storytelling to connect to others, and that's really important too.
One of the sad things I notice in the book is that she develops Alzheimer's. What do you learn from that when she can no longer remember the stories?
It's heartbreaking, really. She was a storyteller. My grandmother she had so much knowledge, I think, of my family and of my community and of our history. And so when she began to lose her stories, she lost an important part of herself, I think. And because because she was the first storyteller of my life, because she helped me to learn to see the world through stories and through connections. It was heartbreaking, I think, for me to witness her losing those stories and losing.
But you feel you're carrying on her work?
I hope so. I hope so. She was an exceptional, storyteller, like in person, an oral storyteller. I practice in a different medium. But I don't know. I hope that I'm carrying on her legacy and that I'm making her proud.
One of the complexities of race you talk about in the book is when your grandmother, Dorothy, goes to visit her white auntie. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's one of the earliest stories that my grandmother told me. As I said, like, she was very intent on telling you the whole truth. But that was one of the earliest stories that she told me. This is my family is mixed, I guess. And so she would visit her white, her grand aunt. So it was her grandmother's sister, who was white, and her grandmother, right, was white. And they actually lived up in the kiln in Mississippi, and, which is, right next to Lisle, just sort of north. And they would visit during the daytime, right? And her white grandmother would go, and then her dad, and then all the kids would sort of pile in the car. But when sunset approached, her aunt would say, "Okay, it's time for y'all to go."
And that's because the kiln was a white community and Lisle was a black community, even though they were abutting each other.
Yeah, and so she was concerned for their safety, right? If they were there during the night. And so they would pile back into the car. But, my grandmother was a brown-skinned woman, and all of her siblings, they were, varying shades of brown. Like, you could tell that they were mixed. And so they would have to hide in the trunk of the car. And she would always tell me, she'd always say, we called it the boot. So we would all have to climb into the trunk of the car, and they would close the boot. And that's how we would ride back, even though the sun hadn't even set yet, but that's how they would ride back from the kiln to Lisle. And her grandmother would sit in front, and then her father, who was so light-skinned that he could pass for white if need be, they would sit in the front.
This great book, which I loved, is called Unwitnessed and Respair. And I know a whole lot of words, but I didn't know the word respair. Tell me about it.
I'm sad that I can't actually remember the name of the poet who taught me this word. It was a poet that I followed, and in 2020, they made a number of posts about how they were thinking about the word respair and holding that word close to them. And when I read it, I thought, well, I don't even know what respair means. And then they explain what it means, and that it means to find hope after despair. And it's, I think I lit up, like now when I read it, because I thought, oh, it's a real shame that we've lost that word and that we don't have that word, because now that I know it, it feels like an essential concept, an essential idea. And so I made note of it. Right. And so then when I was working on the essay about my partner, my spouse, who died in early 2020, I thought this is a perfect word to share, in this essay.
When you were young in the library in Mississippi, there was a map of Mississippi writers, and it had black and white. It had Richard Wright, it had Eudora Welty, of course, and then Faulkner. Now you're on the map in Lisle. But you started reading these people. Let me start, if I can, with Faulkner, because I've got an odd theory about your book, which you may push back on, which is Lisle and all your novels are in this town. It's sort of like your Yoknapatawpha County is to Faulkner. And it's all about storytelling. You have Clinton in Absalom sitting at Aunt Rosa's feet, listening to the storytelling of it. How much do you think you're similar, and how much do you think you're different from Faulkner? Because you both write about race in these tiny communities.
I mean, I think that I definitely sort of modeled this idea of writing about a community, writing about a town, and also fictionalizing basically my hometown in this area along the Gulf Coast, because I read Faulkner and because I saw what he did in his work, and how he made that place seem alive and complicated and real, right? So so I think I definitely modeled my fiction after his. There's this sense of atmosphere in his work that I think that I also try to, translate into my own work.
Well, let me take the black writer that you loved too growing up, which is Richard Wright. And yet you say something of him that's odd. You say he writes with rancor. Did that bother you?
Well, because I think it did bother me. And at the time, I don't think that I could have articulated it. But, as I've sort of grown and developed as a writer, and I think about I thought about his earlier work. I think that the harshness, right? Like the harsh nature of his growing up in Mississippi, like that was always crystal clear in his work, right? And really vivid and well developed. But I was looking, I think, for something more. I wanted to better understand how he survived Mississippi, because I felt like, I don't know, at least for me, family and community are at the heart of that right, of surviving and thriving, right, in spite of.
He doesn't exactly survive Mississippi because he leaves, and right. I think you kind of blame him for leaving, and you come home.
I do.
Let me leap to that. Why did you come home?
I wouldn't say, I don't think that I blame him for leaving Mississippi, because I understand. I fled, when I graduated. As soon as I got the opportunity to get out of Mississippi, I left. And I spent much of my young adulthood, into my 30s, for, 15, 16, 17 years living in other places. But then I returned as an adult. I answer this question often. I usually say that the reason that I returned is because at the same time that I there's some things that I loathe about this place. I also love this place. I love
Tortured love, I think, is your phrase, right?
I love the landscape. I love the beauty of the place. I love the people, right? My family is here. I have a huge extended family. Just on my mom's side, my maternal grandmother's side, there are over 200 of us on that side of my family. And so I have a huge extended family. I have, a community, a really supportive community. And I think it's hard to resist the lure of those. And also, this is a place that inspires me, right? This is a place that informs my work. And so I think I wanted to figure out whether or not I could live and work here as an adult. And so far I'm doing it.
Your novels, all of them, even Salvage the Bones, ends, I think, with hopeful notes. Is that right, and why?
I think so. I think all my work, and there's an element of hope, I think, in all of my work. Part of the reason that I think that is true, and perhaps the most essential reason, is because, as I said, like, I look at my grandmother's life, I look at my great-grandparents' life. When I was growing up, when I was a kid, several of my great-grandparents were still alive, right? And so I, look at their lives, and they, without some sense of hope, without some sense of hope that they could sort of live their way to a better tomorrow, and they could help sort of create a better tomorrow. I don't think that they would have, survived, Mississippi in the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s. So I don't know. So I think that, I try to honor that in my creative nonfiction, but in my fiction as well.
We're about to have our 250th birthday as a nation. It's a time of a lot of despair and a lot of discord. What lessons from poor Black community in Mississippi do you have for the nation?
Well, I think we have to follow my grandmother Dorothy's lead, right? I think that we have to tell the whole story, tell the whole truth. Even if it makes us uncomfortable, we have to reckon and we have to witness with it all. Because that's how we get, I think, to a fuller understanding of who we are and of what we can become. And I think that's how we also still hold on to a sense of hope, especially right now. I think in a moment that, for many of us, especially those of us from my neck of the woods, that can feel rather hopeless.
Jesmyn Ward, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.